In the heart of Stalingrad, during the brutal winter of 1942, hundreds of soldiers vanished overnight. No one could explain what happened. It wasn't a secret mission or a mass desertion. The truth was far more terrifying. This is the story of 40 Soviet soldiers trapped in the basement of a destroyed apartment building. Outside, the temperature plunged to minus 35 degrees Celsius. Inside, death was a silent, patient hunter. This was the height of the most brutal urban warfare in history. Stalingrad was no longer a city, it was a graveyard of rubble. The German Sixth Army fought for every street, every building, every square meter. And the Soviet forces had a single, chilling order: not one step back. Imagine being in that basement. All around you, the moans of wounded comrades mix with the distant thunder of artillery. An unbearable cold seeps into your bones. Your hands are so frozen you can't even pull the trigger of your rifle. You can't feel your feet. But the worst part, the most gnawing enemy, is hunger. You haven't eaten a single bite in 6 days. By day 6 in that basement, the smell of gunpowder had saturated the very air they breathed. Ice crystals on the damp walls sparkled in the faint candlelight. Of the original 40 soldiers, only 24 were still standing. The others were either severely wounded or no one dared to check. Their commander was a 28-year-old lieutenant named Nikolai. He'd only been at the front for 3 weeks. Now, he was the sole beacon of hope for these men. But deep inside, his own hope had already died. The Germans had completely surrounded the building. Their radio was smashed. Help wasn't coming. "Commander," a young soldier whispered, his voice raspy. "The water's gone." Nikolai didn't answer. What could he say? They could eat snow, but that meant going outside, and going outside meant certain death. German snipers watched every shadow, waiting for any movement. But water wasn't the real problem. Food was. The last can of rations had been finished 2 days ago. Some soldiers had started chewing on their leather boots. Others sifted through the rubble, hoping to find frozen rats behind the walls. And the wounded? What could be done for them? By the 4th day, madness had begun to creep in. A soldier named Dmitri suddenly leaped to his feet and lunged for the door. "We have to get out. This place is a grave." He screamed. 3 of his comrades barely managed to restrain him. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing. Nikolai walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "Dmitri, look at me. We are going to survive this. I promise you." But the promise felt hollow, a lie he couldn't even sell to himself. The 5th day was worse. One of the wounded men, Ivan, quietly took his last breath. He was only 19. His mother in Moscow was still waiting for her son to come home. Eva never would. They carried his body to the darkest corner of the basement. There was no soil to bury him in, no priest to say a prayer. Just a suffocating silence. That night, Nikolai made a decision. He wouldn't just wait to die in this frozen tomb. At dawn he would go outside. He would either find food or he would die trying. He chose 3 volunteers, Alexei, Boris, and Yuri. They all knew the odds. They were likely walking to their deaths. "Prepare your weapons," he said, his voice a low growl. We moved before dawn. At exactly 4:30 a.m., the 4 men pushed open the heavy iron door. It was still dark, but their experienced eyes could make out shapes in the rubble. Snow was falling, silently, slowly. Nikolai took the first step. The crunch of ice under his boots sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. They all froze, waited. Nothing. They pressed on. They reached the ruins of a warehouse 2 buildings away just as the sun began to bleed over the horizon. Light was their greatest enemy. To see was to be seen. Suddenly, Alexei found something in a pile of debris. A bag, inside, canned food, 6 cans. His eyes lit up. "Commander, look." He whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. At that exact moment, a single gunshot cracked through the air. Yuri crumpled to the ground, shot through the chest. He wasn't moving. "Run!" Nikolai screamed. But Boris refused to leave Yuri. He heaved his friend onto his back and started running. Bullets whizzed past them from all directions. The Germans had spotted them. By the time they stumbled back into the basement, Boris was wounded too. And Yuri, it was too late. But they had the 6 cans for the remaining men. It was only a few bites each, but it was better than nothing, wasn't it? On the morning of the 6th day, the basement was utterly silent. No one had the strength left to speak. Everyone was just waiting for the end. But then around noon, they heard a noise from upstairs. Heavy boots, voices. Were they Russian? Or German? Nikolai raised his rifle, his hands shaking from cold and weakness. If it was the Germans, he would use his last bullet. The door creaked open, a blinding light flooded in. A Soviet officer stood silhouetted in the doorway. "Comrades, is anyone alive in here?" The survivors couldn't believe it. Some started to weep. Some laughed hysterically. Some showed no reaction at all. For them, it was already too late. Soviet forces had retaken the area. The Germans had withdrawn. Their 6 days of hell were finally over. Of the 40 men who entered that basement, 21 survived. 19 remained behind. Forever. The Battle of Stalingrad lasted for over 200 days and claimed 2 million lives. The story of those 40 soldiers in the basement is just one small statistic, lost in the grand scale of the war. Their names aren't carved onto any monuments. You won't find them in history books. But war isn't just about generals and grand strategies. It's about ordinary people, trapped in basements, fighting to survive the cold, the darkness, and the hunger. Nikolai survived the war, but he never truly left that basement. Every winter he would look out his window at the falling snow and ask himself, did I really escape, or am I still there? Some battles end on the front lines. Others rage on forever in the darkest corners of the mind. And years later, a final heartbreaking truth was discovered. One of the 19 soldiers left for dead in that basement hadn't died from his wounds. He was alive. But in the chaos and the darkness, no one had noticed. He froze to death, alone, right next to his comrades.